There have been 44 Survivor seasons, and though many of them have featured returning players, the majority of them have had only new players in the cast. Of the 44 Survivor seasons, there have been 5 All-Star seasons with only returning players, and 8 seasons with a mix of newbies and returnees. There have been a total of 31 seasons with all new players. Of course, some Survivor seasons are better than others, and it's time to discuss 10 All-Star new player installments that stand out for the right reasons. There are all newbie seasons that are considered among the worst the show has produced. Some of those less than stellar installments include Season 5, Survivor, Thailand, and Season 21, Survivor, Nicaragua. On the other hand, there are several all-new player seasons that are peak Survivor, and should be considered must-watch TV. 10 Season 3 Africa, perhaps a controversial choice on a top 10 Survivor season list. 2001 Survivor. Africa isn't the most beloved season in the show's history. However, Africa is a great old-school installment. It's arguably the most physically demanding Survivor season. One player lost over 80 pounds in the 39-day game, and it features some of the most interesting castaways of Survivor's classic era. The gameplay may be light on strategy, and not very exciting at times, but its Kenyan location is both brutal and awe-inspiring, with wild lions and elephants factoring into the daily life of the contestants. It's definitely a slower-paced game than modern Survivor, but Africa is a rewarding watch due to how unique of an installment it is. 9 Survivor Season 42, easily the best season of Survivor's controversial new era. 2022's Survivor 42 carried over many of the changes that were introduced in the lackluster 41st installment. Examples include the shorter 26-day game, the 3-tribe format, and poorly received twists such as the Hourglass twist and Do or Die. However, the cast of 42 delivered in a major way. The season introduced viewers to several fantastic players who maneuvered through the game in very compelling ways. The fantastic cast made the installment an incredibly satisfying viewing experience, in spite of the unpopular format changes. 8 Season 2 The Australian Outback with the highest viewership of any season. Survivor Season 2, The Australian Outback, was a pop culture phenomenon. It was one of the most watched seasons in TV history when it aired, and nearly every cast member became a mainstream celebrity in the early 2000s. Like Africa, the game is much slower than the fast-paced modern Survivor, but it's a truly iconic season with some unforgettable moments that created headlines around the world in 2001. It also introduced viewers to a number of legendary players. The cast is so great that 8 of the 16 Australian Outback castaways have returned in future seasons, a record for the show. 7 Season 10 Palau 2005 Survivor. Palau is one of the best installments in Survivor history for several reasons. The first is that its location, the South Pacific island nation of Palau, is arguably the most beautiful Survivor location. Palau's World War II history also became the season's theme, which gave the season a distinct aesthetic, and led to some of the greatest and most inventive Survivor challenges ever. The cast was a bit top-heavy, with a number of forgettable players, but the handful of great players on the season are some of the most iconic competitors ever. They were so determined to win the game that the season featured an intense and unforgettable 11-hour-long immunity challenge, which is still the record for the longest challenge in Survivor history. 6 Season 7 Pearl Islands, a top-tier Survivor season. 2003's Pearl Islands featured the best theme of any Survivor season, Pirates. Additionally, the season was full of intense gameplay, including levels of backstabbing and subterfuge that were unprecedented at the time. It also featured an outstanding cast, including at least 3 players who are considered among the most iconic Survivor cast members of all time. Pearl Islands is also known as the season that features the biggest and most iconic lie in Survivor history. 5 Season 18 Tocantins like Pearl Islands and the Australian Outback. 2009 Survivor. Tocantins was the first time several legendary players appeared on the show. There are 4 players on the cast who would go on to play numerous times, all of whom are considered to be Survivor legends in one way or another. The one-time players on the cast are great as well, and the remote Brazilian location is another of Survivor's most interesting settings. Tocantins is a fantastic season by nearly every metric. 4 Season 33 Millennials vs. Gen X 2016 Survivor. Millennials vs. Gen X was an inflection point for the show, as it marked the first season that Survivor began primarily casting super fans of the game. That dynamic led to an intense game that, though contentious at times, was extremely fun. Even though the theme was a bit of a stretch, the castaways were extremely competitive, but sportsmanlike. The season featured one of the most satisfying winner stories ever. 3 Season 1 Borneo. The season that started it all, Survivor. Borneo may not feature the most electric gameplay ever, but it serves as a fascinating cultural time capsule, and it's a perfect entry point for the game of Survivor. The cast is iconic, and led the show to become an unexpected ratings juggernaut and pop culture phenomenon. The game is certainly slow by today's standards, almost unrecognizably so. However, despite the producers and players still figuring out the format, Borneo is a compelling watch, especially given the fact that it introduced the Survivor game to the pop culture landscape. 2 Season 37 David vs. Goliath. One of the greatest Survivor casts ever assembled led to one of the greatest Survivor seasons ever in 2018's David vs. Goliath. What makes the season shine is that every single player brought something to the table. The theme also worked extremely well, with the David vs. Goliath idea anchoring the players within an underdog versus top dog framework that informed their philosophies on the game, and led to some incredible moments. The season also birthed more memes than any other Survivor installment, due to how over the top some of the personalities in the game were. 1 Season 28 Cagayan Survivor. Cagayan is the greatest Survivor season, especially if returnee seasons are taken out of the equation. The season was completely unpredictable from start to finish, and the cast is unforgettable. It was the first season to feature the Brains vs. Beauty vs. Brawn theme, but it wasn't the theme that made Cagayan so impactful. Instead, it was the fact that every player was legitimately interesting and entertaining, even if some of them weren't great strategists. This led to a dynamic game with power struggles, blindsides, and major moves. It's no surprise that a number of Cagayan castaways have been brought back to play on All-Star Survivor seasons.
Love in a modern world is fake when love was meant for joy too. When I find you, I realize that somehow we lie. Love in the modern world it is fake when love was meant for joy. I know that he heard you. Your 5 inches of heart is huge. 널